unless you drop. There's no way, right here and there.
Do you want
Great, yes, it's great.
Well, it's hard to get enough out of it
Yeah.
because my messages. Well, you only have 3 copies, so the copier went down. So I think that's for you guys to share.
I'm not sure. No, I've got it on my computer screen somewhere.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third meeting of our ad hoc master capital planning committee. We can start with the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I am joined tonight by members of the administration and the majority of the board. Mr. Drupp is traveling on business. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Frazier to start the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Block, and good evening, members of the board. Good evening, members of the public. Our agenda for this evening we're not advancing. We'll get some technical assistance. Our agenda for this evening has us reviewing enrollment projections. Oh. Thank you. Enrollment projections. In our first meeting of 3 so far, we took a look at enrollment trends to date. So this evening, we will have a look ahead to our enrollment projections. We will also look this evening at some cost avoidance data as we consider potential school consolidation, both at the middle level as well as at the elementary level. And we'll do so both from an operational standpoint, operational meaning our annualized cost, as well as from a capital standpoint, which would be our one-time capital costs. So we'll have that presentation after our enrollment projections. We will also entertain 2 miscellaneous discussions that Mr. Block will facilitate. The first on elementary school consolidation, and the second will be a brainstorm regarding Chancellor Center, this building, which will really be a continuation of a discussion from the last meeting. And then, as we typically do, we will take a look ahead at future meeting topics, and then, as always, conclude the evening with public comment. As always, I will remind everyone that we do have a designated email address, capitalplanning@crsd.org. So questions, comments, please do email those in, and we do our best to respond to those in a timely fashion. If you have sent something in and you have not heard back, it's simply because we are waiting on information before we have a finalized answer. So I know that we have 2 of those out there right now. Otherwise, we have been able to respond to any and all that have come in. And as appropriate, we are adding answers to a frequently asked questions document that is posted on our website. And then all documents from each meeting are being archived on the website. And this is what that website looks like here today. So you can see that meetings 1 and 2 are segmented. So you have the February 8th meeting separate from the March 6th meeting, and then the subsequent meetings listed there for you. So as of tomorrow, we will list this evening's documents there for the public to be able to see. Before we jump into this evening's agenda, there's one item of housekeeping that I want to do, and that is pertaining to this document that you see up here. This is just a screenshot, so don't worry if you can't actually read this document, but you probably remember this document from our first meeting. This is the document showing the first page of 3 of the 22 classrooms that we could potentially be able to capture through various space efficiencies. So again, it's showing the first page of 3. And the reason why I am bringing this document back up, this is right from our webpage today, is because we have made 3 updates to this document that I want to provide to the community here this evening. And these updates have provided some changes to this document, and they are as follows. The first is to Hillcrest Elementary School. So the previous version, and by previous, I mean the version that we showed on February 8th, and that's also the version that's currently on our website. The previous version showed at Hillcrest us capturing 0 full-size classrooms. The current version, which will be the version that's posted onto the website tomorrow, will actually show a subtraction of 2 full-size classrooms. So we knew that we were very tight at Hillcrest, very close to maximum capacity at Hillcrest. So upon further analysis and just deeper scrutinization of our situation at Hillcrest Elementary School, we know that we are even tighter than what our original analysis showed. So it's actually showing currently a reduction of 2 full-size classrooms as we consider that maximum capacity at Hillcrest Elementary School. So that's not altogether different from how we had previously talked about Newtown Elementary. Newtown Elementary last year, as well as earlier this year, we had talked about that as a subtraction of 1 full-size classroom. Now, again, after deeper analysis and scrutinization, we are looking at that school as a net 0, as a flat net 0 in terms of being able to capture any classrooms at Newtown Elementary. Conversely, we have the opposite happening at Rolling Hills Elementary. We had that as capturing 0 full-size classrooms, and we are now showing that as a negative 1. The reason being at Newtown and Rolling Hills is simply this. At Newtown Elementary, from last year to this year, we are running 2 less classrooms this year as compared to last year at Newtown Elementary School. Whereas at Rolling Hills Elementary School, we are running 1 more classroom this year compared to last year at Rolling Hills. So it's not simply those full-size classrooms that we're running. It's also, as you'll recall from the Newtown Elementary conversation, it's also all the specialized classrooms and teachers and doubling up and even tripling up in many of those spaces. All of that comes into play. So as we consider all of that and analyze all of that, we are down 2 at Hillcrest. We are actually up 1 at Newtown relative to where we were, and down 1 at Rolling Hills. So what does that do for us overall? We were able to capture a maximum of 22 classrooms, and now where this brings us is able to capture a maximum of 20 classrooms. Okay, so that's where we're at overall as of the current time. Now, in terms of our enrollment projections, I will remind everyone that we did contract with Sundance Associates. With us here this evening is Mr. George Sundell. I will introduce Mr. Sundell here in a couple moments to present these enrollment projections. One of the things that Mr. Sundell did, and we will post these documents tomorrow so that everybody will be able to see the detail, is cross-reference the enrollment projections against the latest projections from Decision Insight. Decision Insight, if anyone doesn't know, is a California-based demographic company with whom we have contracted for the past 4 or 5 years. We have since stopped contracting with them since we brought Mr. Sundell on board. But they did fairly recently do enrollment projections for us. So Mr. Sundell's enrollment projections are separate and discrete from theirs, but we were able to compare them with theirs. They're close, but they're certainly not the same. So it did provide a nice comparison for us. And the other piece that I'll point out as far as table setting this work is that also included in this body of work are elementary school capacities, which of course are relevant and germane as we look at potential elementary school consolidation. And I should point out that we are the ones, the school district are the ones who provided these elementary school capacities. So those are provided in the report. They did not come from Mr. Sundell. I am the one who provided those elementary school capacities. And how did we come up with those? How did I come up with them? Really, it was fairly simple. And it's up on the screen. The first piece is simply this. You take a look at the sections that are currently running in each of the elementary schools. You have X number of kindergarten sections, each running with a maximum of 25 students. You have X number of sixth grade sections, each running with a maximum of 30 students. And then you have so many first grade through fifth grade sections, each running with a maximum number of designated students. So you simply calculate the maximum number of students who could potentially be in each of those classrooms. So that's the first step. The second step is to consider these maximum of 20 classrooms that we could potentially capture throughout the school district. We know from our February 8th meeting that most of those classrooms, to capture them, cost money. So we don't factor those in. But we actually have 7 rooms that don't cost us any money at all. They are available right now. So as we consider our current capacity, we can factor in those 7 rooms. So where are those 7 rooms? You see them at the bottom. We have 2 at Holland Elementary School. We have 4 at Soul Finestone Elementary School, and we have 1 at Wrightstown Elementary School. So those 7 rooms at those 3 different schools are also factored into the current capacity. So how many students for each of those rooms? The number is 27. Why 27? Because it has to be somewhere between 25 and 30, and 27 is the natural medium point, leaning a little bit closer to 25 because our average class size, maximum class size, would lean closer to 25 than 30. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions from the board before Mr. Sundell takes over?
No, I got one. We talked earlier, your capacity numbers are not building capacities. I want to make that very clear to everyone in the room. They're not building capacities. If they were, identically footprinted buildings would have identical capacities for students. So we have to, be mindful of that when you see these numbers. They make it, I struggle with those numbers.
It's hard because our programming is different at each building as well.
Yes.
So we have 2 buildings, and this is what we had spoken about. We have 2 buildings that have the exact same footprint, and we don't have the same programming at those 2 buildings. We have a district program at one and not at the other one.
But our numbers switch. Our numbers would tell us exactly the opposite of that.
Yeah, we have some other variabilities in there as well. Right.
Can I ask a question? So from year to year, places where we thought we had rooms, we no longer, places we didn't, we do. So at what point is there a kind of standard deviation recommendation that, if we thought we had 2 classrooms and now we don't have them this year, and guess what? If 2 of those 7 we think we have today, we don't have next year, and we're deciding for 18, we could be in some bad shape. And so where does that kind of advice, I guess, come from? Or do you just use your logic? Or, 7 classrooms in a district of 15 buildings, albeit there are 3 buildings, feels like not a lot of leeway. And so I'm trying to understand how I process that as I hear enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
So just so I can make sure I'm clear on what you're saying, it's how much natural excess capacity would you want in the buildings on average to take ebb and flow of students? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, business-wise, of course,
Yeah.
you want none or as close, you want 100% as close as you can, but these are kids.
Yeah, well, you gotta have some room, so the
And
question is
so I
how
don't,
much, right?
I don't know is there somebody who recommends that to school, like,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing that too. I mean, I kind of go by.
I think it's a great question, and this is a great time of year to ask that question, because this is what we struggle with all the time it's not even necessarily what your overall enrollment is. So take, for instance, Newtown Elementary and Rolling Hills Elementary. It's not necessarily that enrollment is up or down. It might be, it might not be. It's just whether you pop that section or you don't pop that section. So for instance, in cabinet this morning, Mr. Desco went through all the different grade levels and all the different schools where we're one student away or we're two students away. It's March 30th, and we have until June 1st. So this is the delicate balance that we're going to live with for the next 2 months and be very uncertain, and in some cases be very nervous about what's going to pop and what's not going to pop, depending on where we have room and where we don't have the room.
So my experience on the board for 9 years is that because we've generally been in very tight budget situations, we traditionally at June underestimate what we need. And by need, I mean, we'd like more than we can even get. And we compromise in August and say, all right, we're gonna put 2 sections back. We'd like 4, but we'll make it work. And, I don't know. This whole process is very hard to know where's that line of having too much free space and not doing it so tight that you sit here today and in 2 years, you're like, that was a disaster.
Right. We can't go too tight. That's for sure. We can't make a decision this year and be sitting here in the summer of 2018 or the summer of 2019 or the summer of 2020 and say, oops, we can't do that. So, Mr. Desco, do you have those numbers in front of you just to give the board and the public a sense? If you could just sort of go through the same litany that you did today in cabinet.
So in looking at our current enrollment as of Friday, last week, because we had our recent kindergarten and first grade enrollments, so that's what changes. And, for the most part, other grade levels just move forward, but we've already begun to get registrations for other grade levels too. So just to give you a general picture, we have about 9 sections across our elementary schools that are all within 1, 2, or 3 additional students would create a new section. So that would be 9 new classrooms, not necessarily 9 new teachers, because if it was a kindergarten, it would be a half-time teacher.
Right.
So we're keeping an eye on all of those sections. Now we have a couple sections that if you lose a student or 2, we could reduce a section. That is a little bit less likely in those middle elementary grades. Certainly, in kindergarten is in first grade, their transition years. 6th grade, sometimes people are moving out if they're planning to attend in a different environment. But your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th are more typically stable or show growth. So, we're just keeping an eye on these because we have to do a couple of things. One is if a section breaks, we have to make sure we have a space to put the section in the building, and then we have to add a staff member because we use June 1st this year as the break point as to when we would determine that. So if these sections would all break prior to June 1st, we would then create a new section at that grade level in that school. After June 1st, we would begin assigning those new registrations to sister schools where we could accommodate them.
Right. Okay. It just feels like 7 empty classrooms and 9 that might break feels a little tight to me. I don't know. Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, so without further ado, Mr. Sundell, welcome.
Thank you. So it's good to be back, and we are presenting tonight really what is the first step in probably a longer assignment, but that is to establish the foundation for the enrollment projections that we will use as we move forward in any additional studies. I do want to take the time to remind you that my undergraduate degree from the University of Connecticut was in math, where I took a lot of statistics courses. I then attended Drexel University, and I became a licensed architect. However, most of my work overall those years really was in facilities planning. And a little bit more than 20 years ago, I opened up Sundance Associates primarily to do enrollment demographics and facility planning, much like what we are talking about tonight. Demographics, or particularly cohort survival projections, are not crystal ball gazing. They are statistical analysis. And the method that we use is what's widely accepted throughout the United States. Probably about 85% of all the state departments of education say use this method. It's based on your history of your enrollment, and it's based on what births are doing in your local municipalities. However, there are modifications that can be made. That's where someone who's done these for many years is helpful to you. In your projection, I have changed what is normally calendar year births. I've taken the time to adjust them and associate them as school year births, and you find a much better fit when you do that. In one situation, and that is only in the kindergarten to birth survival ratio, just in one small area, I have chosen to use 3 years of history rather than the normal 6. And as everyone is concerned, we also will look at the impact of additional housing and whether or not that's having much of an impact on your enrollment. So there is a standard methodology, and you do use 6 years of historic enrollment. In this case, it's always your October report. We used October 2011 to October 2016. Pretty much what it is, if you would look at the 522 in the kindergarten year of 2011, they show up as 740 first graders in the next year in 2012. And the number you see between them, the 1.418, is the survival ratio. That's a big number. You're saying that 141% of the students in kindergarten show up in first grade. That's because you have a lot of working parents and their children are being put into private all-day kindergartens, preschool, and then they stay there for kindergarten before they come into the district. You do have your 5-year or 6-year average there is 139%. That's a rather large number of increases from kindergarten to first grade. But you do those associations throughout the entire 12 grades. You have 5 ratios with 6 years of history. You sum them at the bottom, the number 1.393 then becomes the survival ratio, the averaged survival ratio for kindergarten to first grade. You do that, first grade to second grade is 1.036. So that's the methodology in analyzing the historic data. And you move it forward into a 5-year projection. That number, for instance, the 1.393 from first grade to second grade is then pulled down, and you just multiply all the numbers out. The computer, of course, does the work for you. Beginning in year 2021, down at the bottom where you see the red, we have run out of births 5 years earlier. The Department of Health hasn't documented them for us yet. So we use the average of 6 years, the prior 6 years for that number. Now, I also do a 6 to 10 year projection, and I have to use that average number for those years also. It's one of the reasons why it gets to be not very accurate in the 6 to 10 year projection that you'll be looking. You can look at it. I hardly even dwell on it. Let me remind you all that the enrollments in the standard cohort survival method are all the time plus or minus 1% accurate per year. That's just a general rule of thumb. So even my first year projections are going to be plus or minus 1% off. By the time we get out to that 5-year projection, it's plus or minus. You have a 10% leeway that the projections might be off by. That comes from many university studies who have taken the time to go back and look at these projections. And when someone said this, and how did they really come out? So
I wanted to ask a clarifying question. And I wasn't sitting here with my calculator, but in the survival methodology, you're looking at the ratio of like second graders to first graders, right? And so if you have a district that's had declining population, and that's kind of baked into the numbers you're seeing, it's not like, for instance, people are leaving to go to parochial school or coming back in. It's not those kind of things. There's this kind of trend. And so does that kind of mess up your survival ratios in any way?
No, it could be both of the things that you mentioned.
Okay, and is it worth, do you ever go back and look at the births that further back in time to see whether that those survival ratios are really just being driven by the births that had occurred much earlier?
Well, they're always being driven by many things, opening or reopening of a full-day kindergarten, or new special ed classes bring people into the district, or the quality of your education is just great. Your in-migration might trend upward because of a better reputation in the school district. There's all kinds of reasons.
Well, and that's the basis of my question, to the extent that just birth rate captures a lot of the variation, and that then you don't really need the survival ratio to get at it, and it would just be either it captures it or it doesn't. No,
Well,
a spurious association.
It's very important to find out, for instance, that 140% of your kindergarten survives to first grade. If you just said, here's birth, and this is how many show up in kindergarten, and move those kindergartners through,
That's
you
a
would.
strong effect in kindergarten and first grade, but it's what I'm worried about is in the older grades.
Well, that's why you do the ratio between each grade, and it has shown that they're generally right. If you've been 103% for the last 6 years, you'll probably be close to 103% for the 5 that you're projecting.
Okay.
So it is a fairly accurate methodology, and it's the one that everyone uses. So when we look at live births for the school year, we find that the trend is for 13 fewer births each year. Now, births last year were at 425. But remember that for that number where we don't have births, we're going to use the average of the last 6 years, and that's 478. So already the number that we're going to use in the 6 to 10 year projection is, 25 or 26, 27 students more than where we were last year. But that's what the methodology calls for, the average 6-year history. Births could turn around next year. We might see an uptick. That's why you use the average. Now, we have many years of decreases, but it could be next year that it would turn around. Your enrollment projections are never static. You do need to keep your finger on the pulse of the situation. So this is just to remind you, if you look at the chart on the right, those are the survival ratios. If it's red, it's below 1. That means less than 100% of the kids in 1 year were surviving. This is your record from birth to kindergarten. So back in 2011, you didn't even have 90% of the kids showing up from birth. By the time we get to 2016, you had over 110%. And there was a pretty gradual increase to that thing. So I just made a decision for the birth decay survival ratio to use the average of the last 3 years rather than the average of the 6 years that's available. Now, what does that do? That adds 27 or 33 in that, between 27 and 33 students in the first 5 years, that 1 to 5 year projection. It adds that many new students in kindergarten. Realize that if I added 25 students in the first year, they move over in the second year to first grade, and I'm also moving 25 into kindergarten. So that second year projection is 50 high, the third year 75 high, as a result of doing this projection. And this might be an opportune time just to say, when you're doing facilities planning, you always want to worry that more students are coming so that you have the facilities for them. You don't want to wind up with lesser facilities. I think we were having that conversation earlier. So it is a good thing to use this 3-year ratio and get these 25. It's one additional classroom. District-wide, it's just one additional classroom. But it's worth having that, the knowledge that that's what we've done in the study. So I want to talk about residential permitting. And just for us to establish that the average in the last 6 years has been about 89 units. So even though it's a little bit up and down, built in, and this is where we talk about trends, built into that historic numbers on which we base our future numbers is that we would have 89 units per year. So when I look at residential construction, I want to know what's above the average, what's above that average. That would be the new trend. Okay, some increase above it. I don't care then about the initial first 89 units.
The permits that you pulled, they were all new construction?
Yes, for new construction. So what I do is I talk to the local planners, I find out when permits were pulled, what's in construction now, what has recently been permitted, and then I don't just go by what they say, I call the developers in each instance. And I ask them, so are you really going forward? Is dirt moving? How, what do you think occupancy will be? And I use, in fact, their schedule to determine when these will impact the school enrollments. And there's a schedule of it. It's obviously you can read it in the written report that accompanies the slide presentation. But pretty much what that shows is that we're going to have 41 students from new housing. I know many of you think the number is much larger. I'll get to that in a minute. The important thing that you've also always asked me in the past also is where do you get your multipliers? If you have 4-bedroom single-family houses, how many students are in that unit? And we do get them from Rutgers University. It's a rather big, elaborate package. As I think I mentioned last time I was here, the one for Who Lives in New Jersey is over 150 pages. They have all the narrative in there, and then they do just tables for the Pennsylvania one. It accompanies the New Jersey one. But for instance, a single-family, 4-bedroom, high-end house in Pennsylvania will have 0.75 students. Okay, that's part of the chart that you'll see along the side. A 2-bedroom, of which there are very few anymore, has about 0.22 students. So we have those for townhouses, we have them for apartments, we have them for high-end, low-end, and average, and we have them for rental and for sale. So we have pretty good, accurate numbers on where this is going, and we do use them. This is the result that we saw in 2017. There was simply going to be 23 new students. In 2018, 16. Minor increases until we get to 21, minor increases through the other year. The total really for the whole 5-year projection is only 41 units. I think many of you thought there might be more of that. Let me say a lot of them came online already. A lot of them that you've heard discussed in the past were in fact occupied by this school year, and there's very little, I forget what the number of units was now, but it's only going to generate about 41 additional students. And we look at those again and put them into the proper elementary school that they're going to go to, and then middle school and high school. So we do know the proper assignment of those students. So, yes.
I don't mean to interrupt at this point, but I am looking at a table that shows 123 single-family units in 2016 and 14 multifamily. Those are the right numbers, correct?
You know what? I don't have that in the size I can say. I don't have that paper report with me,
Right,
which is where they are.
it's your table.
Sure, sure.
So that's 137 units would only generate 41 students. Is that correct, district-wide?
Yeah, I would like to have the table in front of me, but.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but whatever's on that chart of those units. Now, some of them are, they're high-end, or they're age-restricted, or they're being marketed.
We talked about.
They're marketed to seniors with a lot of money who are already empty nesters, and that has been taken into consideration. There's a lot of units in Newtown that are right on a square. They're not going to generate any.
Yeah.
No, it's a big number. I forget the number in my head, but it was a big number of units, but they're not going to generate any kids. 4, I think it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, and I think that we can talk about that sometime in detail if we need to elaborate on it. This will take enough time tonight to go through where we are. So just so that you know, when I'm doing my spreadsheets, if there are, for instance, 22 students coming in that first year, or 23 students, I'm sorry, they're equally distributed across all the school years. So I literally divide 23 by 13 grade levels, and that's about 2 students per year, and they're added in, and we move along in the cohorts survival projection. And the next year there's 16, and that's divided by 13 school years, and they're added in, and then we survive them in the ordinary way. So that's the way I bring students in each proper year according to the developer's occupancy schedule. So this is a long-range picture. I went back more than the 6 years of history, which is what's used in the projection, to 10 or 12 years. I think I have 12 years of history. I just want everyone to realize now you've had 10 years of decreasing enrollments. Unless something significant, really significant, was going to happen, you have continued decreasing enrollments. They may waver a little bit based on some housing that's coming in. And in fact, you can see that that's what they did from 15 to 16. There's a little bit of a pop or a stall there. And it was based on the housing that the previous studies were documenting and have now come online. So in the long run, everyone can understand that we are having decreases. I just want to talk a little bit about the vocabulary of the graphics, if you will, so you understand them as we move through. So the blue bars will be the 6 years of history. The red bars will be the initial 5-year projection, and the lighter colored red is the 6 to 10 year projection, less worthy of our interest. The purple and green lines that you see there are the high and lows that the previous consultant provided. So as you can see, if you look at my red bars there, this is the district-wide projection. My projection happens to be between their high and low. We'll find this is true in most of the projections, including the school level projections that you would see. But again, for facility planning purposes, we're not going to use the number in the projection. In other words, I'm saying that there's 10,466 students in the district in 2021. Your previous consultant said there would be 10,944 if we use their high estimate. What I'm saying we're going to use is 105%, because remember, 5 years out, I could be 5 plus or minus 5%. So I want to use the high number. I'm going to use 105% of my accurate, what I think is my accurate number, for facility planning purposes. So I recommend that we use 10,989, whereas the previous consultant recommended 10,944. That is no difference. In other words, we're in the same ballpark here. I will tell you that when you look at my numbers, realize that I have the advantage of 1 additional year of history of enrollment, and an additional year of births, and an additional year of how many building permits or whatever. So the knowledge, the data is 1 year newer, okay? This numbers I'm showing are their 2015 was their last year of enrollment, and they projected forward from there. My data is last year is 2016, and I projected forward. So this is pretty much what you see. You want to see that the yellow bar, which is my 1.5%, is very close to the green bar from the previous consultant for purposes of facility planning. So there again, we have the district-wide projection. We've kind of, oh yes, I did want to provide on this chart, and you can see it again in the written report a little bit easier. There's also a red line. It's the only one that will have it behind the bars. That is where the projections would have been if I did not use the 3-year birth decay analysis and instead used the standard 6. Okay, so it just, again, it's a little bit more piece of information, and it shows you how mine are elevated because I did that. So it's not worth our time just to look at the district. We need to look at elementary schools. And again, the same three things are there: 6 years of history, 5 years of a projection, and 5 additional years of a projection. Now, on this chart, and on all the elementary charts, I'm introducing that new red bar that you see up at top. That is district capacity, according to Dr. Frazier's calculations, that I am showing in terms of an ability to begin to see how much extra capacity is in the district. And the other thing to notice is that at the elementary level, the prior consultant was anticipating 5,400 for Planning Horizon, and I'm looking at 5,363. So again, it's close, and this is one place where we'll be a little high. Middle school, again, it's kind of a stable projection. They said 1867, and I'm saying 1859. We're really splitting hairs to come up with a different. So our projections are very much in line. Again, we look at high school projections, and those numbers are all in there. I'm a little bit higher here in the high school. I think I'm finding that one additional year of history shows that maybe we'll have some less of a decrease is really what we're having, less of a decrease than we thought in our high school populations. So the bigger and more interesting thing is we go down then to the elementary level. Here at Churchville, my 105% number is 633, and the prior consultant was using 581. That's a little bit of a gap, and I haven't gotten into it enough to find out why there's. But again, if we use that Planning Horizon, that higher number, we're going to do well in terms of making sure that we have sufficient facilities. Good no, we're close. We're only 5 students off between the 2 years, and things are good. But again, there's a lot of capacity in there. With enrollments under 800, we find the capacity, 864, there's plenty of room. Hillcrest is a little bit of a different story with a capacity of 514. We can see that some of our enrollments, or our enrollments last year and coming up for the next few years, are above the capacity of the building. For our Planning Horizon, we will use 536, one classroom short of the other projection. Holland, plenty of room if we look at that red line up there of 432. Our enrollments much closer to 350 are leaving us plenty of room for additional students there, and our Planning Horizon is good. Welch is one of them where their number is higher than mine. But again, the difference between the 624 and the 680 will all iron out when we look at it district-wide. Newtown switched up some students with Wrightstown a few years back. Now, why they didn't pick that up in their study, I don't know. You can see their green and purple line numbers. It's as if they weren't aware of that. And I don't know the answer. So I have new numbers to work with, and they give me a different projection. But again, plenty of room all the way up to that red bar at Newtown. Richboro, again, I am projecting much higher enrollment at Richboro than the prior consultant did. Rolling Hills were both on the same target, and again, plenty of room for expansion there, at least 50 students there. At the Feinstein School, again, our numbers are pretty close, one classroom difference overall. Plenty of extra capacity at that school. And then Wrightstown, as I mentioned, had that switch of students with Newtown, so the projection isn't as clear as we would like it, and they somehow in their projections weren't aware of it, so we have a slight difference. This is a chart then of the comparative enrollments. You see in the Newtown and Wrightstown schools that they're a little funny, but otherwise we have a pretty stable population and slightly decreasing, continuing decreases over time. Some significant at like Richboro and others less significant, but all of them are pretty much in a decreasing mode. We also do the same kind of projection, though we're less interested in them for the middle schools. We didn't bother to put the capacities on there. They're not particularly the subject of interest, and of course, but the information is there for you to look at in those both of the high schools also. So there's a data table both in the report and here in the slide presentation that shows those differences between the prior consultant and myself. District-wide, it's about 70 students. It's not a significant number in the kind of facility planning that we're doing for 5,300 students. It's not. Finally, we get down to this look at, what if we compared that enrollment projection to the capacity, what is the delta then? How much room do we have? And so it shows we have extra capacity in all of the elementary schools except Hillcrest, where we're in fact 22 short, and total district-wide extra capacity of 850 students. And that, of course, is what's leading you to some of your other discussions in the district.
I have to interject. I know this was said before, and I think I understand it, but if I was sitting in the audience, I'd be like, so you're telling me there's 30 extra classrooms in the buildings? We just had a presentation that said there were maybe 7. I mean, that says capacity could be 850 more students. So if you're going to that capacity number every time, there should be 30 empty classrooms.
Oh, it's because
I know why, but I think it needs to be explained for the public, because if I was sitting here, even though it was explained
it's
earlier
confusing.
tonight, it would look it's like shut down 2 elementary schools at least, and so I think the definition of that capacity number needs to be clearly stated. We just can't take rooms, fill them till they're 30, and then
maximum
move on to the
capacity.
next room.
Right, as maximum capacity.
It's maximum class in every grade.
Every section, every room.
In every section.
Right.
That's an unrealistic expectation to be judged against. I'm not really sure why it was used, but we don't have the ability to just line kids up and go, okay, first 30, you go there, next 30, you go there.
So back to your question around some guidance for us on what's the right number. Is it 90%, which means we should always keep 600, give or take?
Well, is it 90% of what?
That's what I mean. I was using that as an example, just based on.
But it's more than that, Andy. It's not only 90%, because you're not going to start with building A and line it up to 90%.
No, I get it. I'm just looking for a baseline to help us understand what
Exactly. And
that means, because you can redistrict the 90% around.
I don't think the bar that it gets compared against is very misleading for the public. It's very misleading. Should be that capacity number. I don't know what that number is. That's what I was trying to ask earlier, because I don't know what else you compare it to. But to me, we're not sitting here with 30 empty classrooms.
So you're saying it would be helpful to have a position on here's what optimal capacity is to give us room to account for population influx, outflux, and here's maximum capacity, which is what this is.
I would say
Yeah, I mean,
optimal sections.
Yeah, I agree. Possible sections
Optimal
is
sections in
probably,
a school.
Right.
Probably the easiest for even the administration to grasp.
But
Exactly.
just
But
to
it's just-
clarify, in the past with Schrader, for instance, our capacities were at 90%. It was not taking 27 kids or 30 kids.
but I don't care. We're not using Schrader anymore
Yeah,
anyway.
but-
We've got a new
So what did
barometer.
we use? Did we use the 90% or did we use absolutely full classrooms in each school? I don't know what did we
Absolutely full.
use.
Well, that forgave me, but I believe it was 90%.
It was 90%.
I believe so.
Okay. So we did use the 90%.
I just think it leads people to think you're going to be able to do that. In order to do that, we'd have to start at school A, line the kids up, and 27 kids stop and go on to the next classroom.
Well, that's
And
100%,
that-
but we used 90%.
Even at 90%, there are 850 student capacities, and we've got 7 classrooms empty. So
No.
But our
Hang on one at a
buildings, we have many buildings that have lots of room because their sections are not at their
right.
limits.
So the only way to do that is to start at the beginning and fill up and then keep moving along. But you'd have to redo that every single year. So that is the question of where, what number are you going to use? And frankly, I think it varies by grade, but.
I mean, that's why you
Very
that's why you redistrict. I mean, you look at Holland.
Every year?
No, that makes no sense. Look at Holland right now. We have 19 in a classroom, 21, 18, 23, 23, 28. I mean, you can do this across the whole district. Richboro, 22, 21, 23, 23, 23.
And you can do
18,
it every year.
19,
Hang on,
20.
I
Why
think-
would you have to do
One
it
at a
every
time.
year? You
In
do
the
it-
last
do it
9
one
years,
time,
if you pull
because-
it, it's different every year. There are clearly some efficiencies. I'm not saying there's none, but to say that there's an 850 student capacity in the elementary schools that we can effectively impact as a board, I think is.
So-
Well, say it's half that.
So I'm interested in Mr. Sandell's opinion around that threshold that you leave in each building to give you the ability not to have to redistrict every year to accommodate for the flow. I mean, would you say you leave two empty classrooms per building, or is there a percentage? How would you, based on your expertise, provide us some direction? Go back to Wendy's question around what's kind of optimal capacity so you give yourself room to grow, so you can redistrict once and not have to come back to it for a while.
Well, let me simply say this. Any extra classroom that you leave, so to speak, will be well utilized. Only because programs grow. So you do want that advantage of having at least 2 classrooms per school, but it might even be as much as 1 per grade level. They will be utilized in the terms of where they come up with. 90% is the number that, facility that you're throwing around, and it is the number at an elementary school level that you look for in terms of utilization. 85 by the time you get into middle school or high school. So there is that. We did talk earlier today, Dr. Frazier and I, in regard to moving ahead with a step in the enrollment projections that takes number of students and puts them into sections for the future, so that you can literally take the same charts where we have enrollment by grade level at each of the schools and say how many sections we would need, and then compare that to school capacities. It's just a little more definitive than using these gross numbers, which has you a little bit anxious, and it is a better way, and that was what we were going to do next.
The thing is, though, that in the majority of our schools, we have 7 grade levels where there is room for more students. And this is showing us that even in the most conservative view, we will be flat for the next 5 years. Because that 5 years out, in the most conservative approach with that 10-point swing, so it could be even less, but even in the most conservative approach, the highest the enrollment will be is less than it is today. So we can look at our district right now and say, okay, for 5 years worth of planning and for whatever redistricting we're going to plan, this is our district. And we can safely assume that we can fit those 5 years worth of students in, because we're fitting them in right now.
That is an accurate statement, right? When using the 105% number, we're pretty much stable where we are today. If they were be able to be housed today, then they will absolutely be
Right, and that's your
able to
most
be housed in the
conservative,
future.
that's your most conservative
That's the most
approach,
conservative
because in
approach.
that range, we
That's
could
correct.
actually be substantially less. But in the most conservative, we're no different 5 years now out than we are right
Correct.
now, a little bit less.
Thank you.
And are there any other questions on this discussion? Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sundell. Very much appreciated. And again, we will post to the website tomorrow on that same landing page, both PowerPoint from this evening as well as the main document, the main report that Mr. Sundell had referenced. So look for both of those before the close of business tomorrow. And now for our next agenda topic this evening, we have our cost avoidance presentation. This will be made jointly by Mr. Reinhardt, Director of Business Administration, and Mr. Doug Taylor, our Director of Operational Services, and this is on cost avoidance. Again, both from an operational cost standpoint as well as a cost avoidance, operational cost standpoint and capital cost standpoint. Gentlemen, floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. This evening, we're going to talk about 3 buildings, and we're going to talk about Rolling Hills, Richboro Middle School, and Wrightstown Elementary School. I am first going to speak on the operational cost avoidance. That includes annual recurring costs involved in the continuous operation of the district and included in the general fund budget. Unlike the capital cost avoidance, which includes one-time improvements and renovations needed to extend the useful life of a facility, these costs are generally expended in the capital fund, and it's separate from the general fund, and it's usually financed through debt issuance. And if I can make the comparison here, is the operational costs in our general fund budget, salaries, benefits, supplies, and things like that, I will be speaking about, and they reoccur from year to year. Now, you can either choose to use the savings to reduce the need for additional resources, or you can reallocate those funds to do things that you're not doing today. So that's the biggest thing that I want to make sure you understand. Capital cost avoidance is one-time items where we need to generate resources through generally debt issuance, significant resources where we go for a bond issue. The only way that affects your budget is on an annual basis, you pay your mortgage. It's your debt service that you pay. I've done a lot of presentations on that, and you guys realize how we've managed that to try to keep the burden to the taxpayer low while we're borrowing money to be able to do these things. So the capital costs, they affect your debt service in your general fund, but the actual expenditures the large expenditures occur outside the general fund. Operational cost avoidance is year after year expenditures. I'm going to try to describe what we've done for the operational cost avoidance. So one of the biggest things that we've done is looked at this and said, we're going to take a conservative view. We don't want to give you savings numbers that aren't achievable. But there's a lot of difficulties as we talk through this. We're giving you savings numbers out years prior to the actual budget. As you know, last year, we actually cut areas in the budget, staff members and things like that, that could be something that we assumed were going to be still there to cut in a future budget. So things are always moving. The other thing that occurs is with the salaries, we always say we want to, if we're reducing staff, we want to do that through attrition, meaning that we want to do it with staff members that are leaving through retirements or something such as that. Every year, you know, we're talking in our budget about how many retirements and what savings will that do on a budget basis. So if I take it out now and then tell you I'm going to take it out again next year, so I have to be very cautious on me giving you a high number saying we're going to save $109,000 of each salary coming out of there. It's going to cause a problem because that same year, you're going to expect me to say, guys, we're going to have 25 retirements. That's double dipping the numbers. So understand this, when I show you this, is going to be things that we can achieve, but you can say, well, Bob, why'd you do it this way or that way? Every time we've tried to make sure it's achievable. Let's go through all cost avoidance based on identified staff reductions associated with the closing school. You're going to see this, that we have no heating, utilities, or anything like that that are involved in this at this point. When you tell us what that building is going to do and how long we are going to have that building before either we remove it from as an asset or we repurpose it, that's when we'll take those utility costs out and things such as that. What else do I have in there? I think that's pretty good with going over what I did. Okay. Elementary school operational cost avoidance, very different than the middle school because it is a less complex organization. You have teachers at the grade level that teach the same number of students throughout the day. And we are not taking any of those students out of service, meaning that the children are going to go to another school. We're expecting that the teachers will also go to other schools and dealing with that. We've been talking a lot about efficiencies here, and can we expect 100% efficiency, or can we expect 84% efficiency? We all expect if we would close a smaller school, it is shown that smaller schools are less efficient because 2 children could cause a section to come in because you only have 2 sections at that school as opposed to having 5 or 6 sections at a school. So we would expect that there could be additional savings as district-wide consolidation would cause our efficiencies to go up. That is not accounted for here. So these are estimates based on salaries and benefits. So when you look at this, don't think that the 175 is a salary. That also includes 32% for retirement that we have to pay, 7.65% for Social Security, healthcare benefits, and everything such as that. These are all costs associated with that. And you will see Wrightstown and Rolling Hills have different numbers at the bottom, but are very similar in what we are reducing. Librarian, there's a 0.5 librarian at Wrightstown. There's a 0.8 librarian at Rolling Hills. And again, as I said before, things like this can change. In the year we looked at this, there's a 0.5 at Wrightstown, and Rolling Hills there's a 0.8. Maybe for staffing reasons, there could be changes to that, so this number could change. A library aide is in both. Maintenance person is in both. Recess aides, again, a little less at Wrightstown Elementary, a little more at Rolling Hills. The secretary in each, and you will see $624,000 we believe we would save at Wrightstown Elementary, and Rolling Hills $709,000. Again, I'm telling you that we believe is achievable. We can debate any one of those, but there's the other things. I know Dr. Foster questioned about some things that we'll talk about also in adding things or subtracting things, but I want to make sure that you understand we believe this is achievable. We could put all kinds of other things in there that we think might happen, and it may not be achievable, so you're looking at conservative numbers here.
And so I just wanted to make a point. So, and sometimes people are uncomfortable doing this, but you know, every industry has its metrics. So, you know, an airline will be dollars per passenger mile, right? And so the enrollment at Rolling Hills is twice that at Wrightstown. So if you are interested, you know, you can take these numbers up here and divide by the enrollment. And because the enrollment is so much higher at Rolling Hills, you get a difference of $1,300 per child, where Wrightstown is $1,300 per child more because you have a lot of the same stuff.
Yes.
It's just over half the children. I mean, if that matters to anyone, that's just part of this.
Well, I mean, you could also look at delivery of education per dollar too. You've got all the PSSA scores and stuff, and that's what we do. Is we deliver education. We could look at it that way.
Yeah. Well, and that's why that IDEC software was so great, right? It allows you to do exactly that.
I'm more inclined to
look at the dollars per.
We don't do widgets, so I mean,
Well, but I think the assumption as a school director is that all of our schools they better be delivering the education equally as well, or we have a major problem. So, I mean, are we willing to say that those schools are significantly different in the quality of education that the children are receiving there, or are we saying that they're comparable? So, you know, I hope they're comparable between those schools. I mean, the class size guidelines are similar across the schools. The programming is similar. So, I mean, that's an issue.
Any other questions regarding these numbers? As I turn to the next group of numbers, which is going to be the middle school, you're going to see savings are much greater at the middle school. Unlike the elementary school, where I said there's no savings for efficiencies or anything, I think you're going to see that there are savings for efficiencies in the middle school, and it's easy to see. And Mr. Desko will help me with this as we talk about program and teams. So, as you look here, there'll be one instructional assistant we believe would be reduced with consolidating three middle schools into two. Professional staff, 13.2, and you'll see the number there. One library aide, nurse's assistant, secretary, security guard, extracurricular. That's sports and extracurricular activities which really are not involved in the elementary schools. You will see that in the past I had the number of 1,576,000 or something like that. The $180,000 was not included in that number that you have seen in the past through the projections and my forecast going forward. So what I want to explain to you is the middle school program is not grade level programs like we had before. It's teams of employees. And there is a core team. There's a core team worth 5 teachers, Barry. And then there's an arts team worth a mix about.
Barry, that's not helping.
In the vicinity of 6.
Of 6, and that includes the arts, music, visual arts, phys ed, tech ed, family and consumer science, yes. So those type of positions. And then there are some other auxiliary positions that are involved in getting to that number. So that number now is coming to about 1.8 million. It's very different than the elementary school, but those are the reasons why. Any questions here? Because I know there was a lot of comments in regard to elementary being low, middle schools being high.
I have a question.
Yep.
Just tell me why the $180,000 doesn't transfer with the kids for the extracurricular.
When you think about it, we now have 3 sports teams. We have 3 middle school sports teams. We are going to have 2 middle school sports teams. So there's going to be less equipment, less coaches. The clubs that are at 3 are now going to be at 2. And that will not transfer because of that.
Are there any cost increases at Holland Middle to accommodate, like, basically 100% increase of students coming in?
There are. I don't know that this number is an average number that Barry and I wrote things down, but I do believe there could be increases that are in there also. There are things we haven't taken out of here that might be able to be taken out of here as we get closer to the date. Especially there could be a variance in professional staff depending on what really is going to happen. I can tell you Barry's been reworking these numbers 5 different times, I think over the last 3 days, and just getting different opinions. But until that year comes, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen.
So I just want to be, were you done? I just want to be clear that these positions and this cost savings, is it, like, these folks are leaving the district. We're not moving them to another building or moving this cost item to another building. Follow me? Like, this is
Yes,
actually going to
these
be
are
a net
positions that would
savings.
no longer be needed, and we'd expect to be able to do this through attrition.
Okay.
We generally get 25 professional retirements a year, so we believe we could do it through attrition. Yes. Okay? This is what Barry and I were just talking about. The core team, the 5 and the 3.2. You get to the 13.2. Okay. Another item that I think Dr. Foster asked me to go over. This has nothing to do with the general fund at this point. Our food service has a separate fund. It is funded through user fees, meaning payments that the students pay for lunch, and state and federal subsidies. What we've looked at is what does it cost per year for the direct labor to serve those lunches? as opposed to the food costs, which the food costs will follow the student. The direct labor, because that cafeteria will no longer be needed, we've determined that Wrightstown, we would save the operating costs within the food service, because we're not operating that food service anymore, of $20,350. Rolling Hills, $35,760. And Richboro Middle right now is $57,600. We do want to put in there that we may reserve some of those funds for Holland Middle to be able to increase their staff, because they will have more serving for children.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yep.
That last statement, I've heard it a couple of times now. You're implying that all the kids at Rolling Hills are going to end up at Holland Middle. It doesn't work mathematically. I mean, maybe that's for your financial, but from a public perception thing again, we're not just absorbing an entire middle school into one of the others. We've talked about, we've got to balance these kids out.
I think all I'm showing here is if we would decide to close Wrightstown Elementary School.
No, I meant the Richboro Middle one.
Or the Richboro Middle, I'm saying that right now their enrollment is what? 500? Well, 500. It will go up to, it could go up to 800. And I'm saying that there'd be more people being served there. So because of that, that 57,000 may not be a complete savings, that we may replace people and put them.
Yeah, I think Mike's just trying to make the point of clarity that there shouldn't be an assumption that everybody's going to go to Holland, that we're going to redistrict, and these school feeder patterns will look very, very different, which ultimately will find the savings, but it might not be at Holland where something to go back to could be easy. So I appreciate what you're.
Got it. Okay, does everyone, good.
And I haven't looked ahead, but have you done the same thing with Aramark with the square footage costs?
We discussed Aramark, and until we dispose of the building, we do not want to show that as a savings.
Okay.
We do have numbers, and if I'd have to go back to my place and look at them, but
That's fine.
I want to make sure this is achievable year one. If we're holding on to these buildings for a year, 2 years, and now I'm telling you, well, we're not really going to save from the Aramark contract this year, maybe next year, and it keeps being delayed, that's why we don't want to show them. Again, I want to make sure this is achievable. I don't want to put other numbers in there. The same thing with utilities. I don't want utilities to be shut off, because if we still own the building, we're going to be heating it at some level. Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Doug. I'll be back a little later.
Very quick.
Thank you. So taking a look at the cost avoidance from an operational standpoint from capital projects. What I want to clarify at looking at these numbers, first and foremost, when you look at the capital improvement plan under the summary of costs for all of the projects, there's the blue column that outlines what the capital costs are for each building with a 30% fees and contingency. It's important to understand that when we're looking at this and we want to go in and take a look at the overall cost of what it would be for cost avoidance, I don't want to look at that column without looking at what it would cost to totally renovate the building at $180 a square foot, which are the two columns we look at when we decide if we should perform summer work, or if the number exceeds 60%, we should start to look at total renovations in lieu of working with summer projects. And the best way I can explain it is when you look at that blue column with all of the items identified as capital needs in the plan, each one of those projects is listed with the cost to perform that project. And if we can team a couple of those up when we do a project, like replace a ceiling and replace the light fixtures at the same time we replace the ceiling, we would gain some minimal efficiencies when we do that. But if we're going to go in and perform the total renovations, in the case of Rolling Hills and Wrightstown, it's more cost effective to look at the $180 a square foot for total renovations versus doing it through the individual projects. It would be like building a car with individual parts versus buying a new car. One is going to be more cost effective than the other. So when I look at Rolling Hills, the renovations plus 30% fees and contingency is right out of the plan under the renovations. line item plus the 30% fees. So we're looking at about $11.9 million of work needed to renovate the building. Environmental remediation is another line item out of the book at about $152,000. Roof replacement is also something that's required as part of the Rolling Hills project at $2.2 million. And a site allowance if you're performing a renovation project of about $1 million, which is tough to know until you actually have meetings with municipalities to understand exactly what those requirements may or may not be, but it's a safe number to assume. So the cost avoidance for Rolling Hills is about $15.3 million. And you can ask, well, when we've done these summer projects, I've always seen $18, $19 million, but that's because most of those projects have also included additions at the same time. So the renovation of just this building alone without any programmatic enhancements is the 15.3. Any questions on Rolling Hills?
Just a question for Mr. Reinhardt. So that's the capital needs piece. So if we were going to have to borrow additional monies than planned, there would be an annual operating expense piece too, which hasn't been, we know what that number every year might be for something like this? I know that's a hard question.
Well, it's really sensitive to interest rates.
Right.
And I did show you for the $20 million to repurpose Richboro Middle School, that I showed you that I believe we would have to go up another mill or just over $300,000 at current interest rate environment to borrow $20 million. As you know, if you'd like me to really get into this, I could show you the graphs that I always show that you could see what's going on. If you want me to do that tonight, I can.
No, I'm not trying to, I just.
Yeah, I would say
because there's more, there's, if we don't do this, not just the money that we're saving, making improvements, it's the money to.
After 5 years, our debt service is going to drop off significantly. So if we go out longer than 5 years or something like that, it would be allowing us to go for more debt service without impacting taxes.
But we usually pay back in like 10 years, and it's about 4% interest thereabouts, right?
It was much less than that. I would say right now it's less than 4%, especially when you look at how we're structuring the issue. Right now, we talked about that 20 million, and the last time I did the analysis, 20 million with principal and interest, the way we structured it is about $31 million. It would cost us over 8 years. Do you guys remember talking about that?
Yeah, so you'd add another 7 to that, give or take, if that's 15 million versus, 11 on 20.
If you want to put interest to that, I understand what you're saying, yes.
I'm just trying to get a sense for, not only am I saving this by not having to do it, but by not having to take out the money, I'm potentially finding more money that I can either not tax or vote to.
And I will tell you, I think a lot of the things that we talk about here is if we're not doing this, there's other projects that probably need to be done.
Yep.
So this is really a line of priorities, and taking this out, you can bring something up in priorities then.
That's a good point.
So that's the way I look at it as opposed to not doing
That's a
anything.
great
We have
point.
plenty of projects out there that probably need to get done to some level.
The other, I'm glad you brought that up, Andy, because this is something I've talked about a lot. We always talk about the cost of the financing as it sits today, but we hardly ever include the real cost of the debt, the overall cost of the debt over the life. And that, like these 2 middle school projects were at $110 million, but the overall real cost of those projects can be closer to $180 million. I think we calculated $170 million. So you have to include that cost of debt. So I'm glad that that's becoming part of the regular discussion. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Until this year, we had historical low interest rates. And I think we made very good decisions on how we handle our debt and how we're handling our debt. I do believe those times have changed, and our debt is going to cost more than it has before. And we're not going to look back and say, oh, the interest rates were at all-time lows, because they are no longer at all-time lows.
Well, that changes the cost of debt, right? But
Yes.
it's still, we have, whether interest rates average 4%, as Dr. Foster said, or if they average in low interest rate environments, if we're lucky enough to average 2%, which we probably won't see again in our lifetimes, but there's still that cost of debt. So my point was, we should be talking about the real cost to the district over the life of that project. So again, I appreciate it.
But there is something deceiving about that because we have a line item in the budget that we use for paying back our debt. So there's been borrowing that we've done that actually has not raised taxes because we've kept that payback of our debt service level. So I understand what you're saying. When you talk about the cost of the buildings, the big number of what the cost of the capital improvements are, plus, the interest on the debt is a real number. But the impact to a taxpayer, there could be no difference because we're always going to have to borrow for something. Our buildings have needs. We could choose to lower that amount for sure, but it's a moving target. I think it's a gray area because that we could borrow a lot more money potentially where it would have no impact on taxes. So you have to have it in a context.
Well, I don't think it's deceiving. It's math, right? It's just the math of what the cost of the project is over the life of the project. So the debt service is completely different because that's the cost of that debt service over time. So we're either adding to it or we're subtracting to it or we're keeping it the same. But to somebody's point, we could use that money for other things in the project.
Absolutely, but
I'm going to disagree with you about the fact that saying that the middle school projects cost $110 million is deceiving because it's going to be much greater cost to the district over the life of that. So it's just simple math.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you about that. I'm just saying that it is one picture of the finances of how we look at our finances and borrowing and totals. But yes, the total project is whatever those capital costs are, plus the cost of the borrowing, for sure.
I've always said that the merit of the projects determine if we're doing them or not. The financing is the mechanism to do that.
Right.
We took advantage of low interest rates, but at no point should we have borrowed that money just to spend the money. So I do say that you guys look at these projects by the merit of the projects as opposed to the financing of the projects. The financing is the next step, and our planning is based on what we expect to happen. So the financing doesn't wag the dog, I guess. The financing is the mechanism. But Mark, you're exactly right, but I think we made good decisions so far with what we've done and managed the debt well.
So the other thing I'll say, well, since we're back on this slide, is this is the cost to renovate that building. Again, we're looking at this at 10,000 feet. When you go into a building like that, there's going to be inefficiencies when you renovate a building. Could it necessitate some small additions, a boiler room, things that it doesn't have today? Absolutely. So this is a very safe number in terms of what you would save if you were to avoid this work. So Richboro Middle School, this number is a number that we have seen before in the last presentation when I reviewed the project. So the renovation cost on this project at $150 a square foot has raised some questions. Why 150 when every other project that we've seen for renovations is 180? And I'll say it again, we're at about 10,000 feet. No one knows exactly what the scope of these projects are. The discussions for the most part have been renovating this facility into office type space. Certainly not a school proper kind of renovation. And in saying that, you avoid a lot of the costs that you would see in a typical school project, like science casework, a library, some of the major components, kitchen equipment, excessive electrical work for data and those kind of drops, all of which add a lot of cost to a project. So until we know exactly what this building wants to be, we can't define that number. But the estimate of probable cost based on what we know today, it's a fair, safe number from what we've been discussing. So that 150 is the 13.3 million. The environmental remediation is the 267,000. It does require a new roof, site work allowance, and applying a 30% fees and contingency to that number is about 22.9 million. If you were to renovate this same facility as a school at the 180 a square foot, you're looking at about a $24 million project in comparison. So just wanted to review that number again. And lastly, Wrightstown, taken out of the capital improvement plan at $180 a square foot plus fees and contingency is the 7.2 million. The remediation is about 93,000, site allowance of $1 million. This project requires some things, and again, this is an estimate at a very high level at this point, but without doubt, the project will require fire protection system if you renovate the building. We don't have public water on this site, so we will absolutely have to provide fire tanks and a pump to provide the water and pressures needed. The wastewater management system will require some modifications and a lengthy approval with DEP. And we need a new electrical service entrance. So those costs are added to this at about a $9.2 million cost avoidance at Wrightstown.
Leaving it with the same programming footprint, meaning K through 4.
Absolutely.
And if we
Same capacity that it has right now.
K through 6 through the line, that would require significantly more add-on to.
This doesn't include enlarging the cafeteria, putting a gym on for parity with other schools, putting classrooms back on it that we lost with the modulars. This is just taking the school as it lives and renovating it at the same footprint it has today.
And again, just back to that normalization where you look at this spending per child educated. And so again, given that difference in enrollment, if you take the 15.3 million at Rolling Hills and divide it by the current enrollment of 439, that comes out to $34,852 per child. And at Wrightstown, the 9.2 million divided by the current enrollment of 213 comes to 43,192. So, a difference of $6,000 or so in cheaper per child at Rolling Hills. So it's again one of those things. What are you using the building for? How much is in that building? And what are those dollars getting?
So my direction was going to go in about the same way that Andy's was. It was about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, that we thought there was no opportunity to expand Wrightstown, right? And then we learned that actually we might be able to do that. Am I wrong? You're shaking your head.
There's always been an understanding, at least as far as I believe, that we could put back the 5 or 6 classrooms that were removed because we had those modulars on site as classrooms. So we could always replace the capacity that it once was with that same capacity back. So without affecting the site, the wastewater system, because we had that number of students there when the system was designed. But beyond that, then we'd have to have some discussion in terms of how that would work, expanding it beyond.
But I think we've learned that we can expand beyond that. So my question would be, and maybe this is an area we should be talking about this another time, and if that's the case, let me know. But I'd like to see what that number would look like if we brought it up to par with the other elementary schools, adding 4 classrooms, expanding the cafeteria, what the overall cost would be.
Sure, I have that number. Okay. I don't have it here, but I do have it in my office. Yeah. No
And
problem.
that would include adding a gym and whatever else is needed for parity.
My number includes that, yes.
Thank you.
Great.
I just struggle with adding classrooms to a district that has too many classrooms. That's all.
Yeah,
It's just an
Bill,
odd
I'm
thing.
just trying to apples to apples it, And since Doug already has the info, it's no.
No, I think it's a good question. I mean, it's going to come back to where are the kids and where are the buildings and what's the best way to redistrict and what are the costs and the savings associated with that. I mean, I don't know if we'll see it, but you could see, the math could tell us that it makes more sense based on where the kids are to expand. I'm not saying that it does, but to expand Wrightstown and close another school because of where the kids are. I don't necessarily, I don't know where it's going to land, but I think that's a good question to ask and something to think about when we start drawing the maps. That's going to be the key is where the kids are and where the building, where the buildings are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
This was added recently. Dr. Foster asked about a per pupil cost per building. And I will tell you, this is done. I did this back in 2015-16. If you would like me to do a more recent study, I can also do a more recent study, but it would take some time to prepare it. In this study, what I've done is I've determined what are direct costs and what are overhead costs. I put in this calculation the direct costs and excluded the overhead costs. In calculating this again, I did a standardized cost for per personnel. I did not want a senior staff to require a district to look more costly, a building to look more costly than another building. So I did a standardized cost with all the relationship to the costs. And we just put the numbers together. One thing we did do is we excluded all district special ed class staffing and student counts from each building because there are district classes in various buildings that affect the number and would increase the cost per student. And we tried to show this really based on the efficiency of the building and how it was running at one time. This is not something that I want you to say, look at Hillcrest or look at this school, because the numbers have changed. Enrollment has gone up, staffing has changed, but this is a point of time that you can at least understand the variance between one building and another building. Direct costs include regular teacher salaries, and you can go down and look at everything. Charter school payments is an overhead cost. We did not include that. Contracted special education, we did not include debt service and things like that. So those are the items that are not included in this. If I allocated all these costs to all the different buildings, the cost per pupil would be higher. So if you'd ever want to look at the full budget and say, what does it really cost? This number isn't giving you that. This is more about the efficiency on how the building is run. So when you look at it, 15, 16, these were the adjusted enrollment numbers, and that means adjusted if there were district classes in there, those students are not included. Also, the teachers teaching the district classes were not included also, but you can see the range of cost per student based on this. And it really is the efficiency of the building, meaning if the average first grade class had 17 students in the class and another average in another building had 25 students in that class, of course, the classes with only 13 students would cost more. And that's really what drives these numbers the most. Makes sense. Look at Newtown Middle, the largest middle school compared to Holland and Richboro. I expect now, when we have two middle schools, I expect that the two middle schools will probably be closer to a number because we're going to gain efficiencies. And you can see the detail there, and these are the adjusted enrollment. And I prepared this just, Dr. Foster asked that I show this, and I think this relates to some of the comments you made before.
But given we don't use the buildings as efficiently as we can, this is kind of skewed, right? This cost per student would look much different if we were using them efficiently based on our current student body.
Correct. Very much.
Yeah, so
I believe I did a study, and I think it was about 84% efficient. We were at the best. So when we talk about 100% efficient, I think it's more like 84% or something like that where we operate now. So that those numbers, when we were showing the capacity numbers, I kind of think they're pretty much lower unless we're ready to redistrict much more often and keep equalizing the sending areas.
When the cost of your teachers are contracted across your whole district, it's just math. The less kids in the building, the higher the costs in the building, generally speaking, within a deviation percentage. It's not, yeah. So, you you could say every elementary school under 500 should be eliminated. We should only build 700 Life elementary schools. get your efficiency numbers. It's just,
Okay. Any more comments about this information?
Sir? So does that finish the presentation section? I'm on? So, thank you, gentlemen. So it's unfortunate Mr. Grupp isn't here because these next two discussions were prompted by some comments that he made at earlier committee meetings. So I wanted to kind of talk very briefly about two things, given the time, so we can get to the future meetings and public comment. But the first question that I wanted to ask, Jerry at the last meeting had suggested that he had a desire to focus on the redistricting with everything else going on in the district, that he wasn't necessarily, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but wasn't necessarily interested in consolidation of elementary schools at this time, and had asked to have a discussion about that. So at this point, I wanted to see if there was anybody that that felt that way, and if there was a group within this board who wanted to have that conversation sooner rather than continue to have the administration do the work they're doing to help us.
So, I mean, I just wanted to say, I think we all agree that the redistricting information is helpful. And so you and I were having a discussion over here that, and it relates to some of the comments from Mrs. Thomas, that, if you took our district and our enrollment right now and said, hey, let's redistrict, and pretend that we got rid of school A, what would the savings be? The kind of savings that Mr. Reinhardt said he didn't include in the analysis. And that's exactly what the software allows us to do. And I'm hoping it allows us to do it pretty quickly, like a day or two of somebody's work. You could say, hey, let's pretend we close that school and we redistrict. And yeah, there's going to be neighborhoods and islands and all that, but just, as a rough estimate, what kind of increases do you get where you're not on the knife edge of in a 2-section school where you have to bust a section, because now you have 4 or 5 sections. So it's a much more robust school, and that plays out across the whole district. The next thing you know, it leads to something. So I think that the redistricting information should inform us and help us and guide us. But I mean, we should get going. I mean, I especially have concerns that, and I'm always jealous of this neighboring district, Central Bucks. So they just spent $3 million upgrading their athletic fields. Like what we said earlier, we have so many things that we could be doing. And we always talk about how we need more strength in our administration, but none of us want to raise any taxes. So, where's the money going to come from?
Hang on,
and I think it really comes from operating expenses, and redistricting is about operating expenses. In school consolidation, if you can save $600,000 a year from now to the end of time, I mean, that's really valuable money for programming. So I see Mr. Grupp's point in a way, but I think that redistricting is just part of our decision making. I think the software helps us navigate that quickly and inform our thinking about what money we could or could not get.
Right.
That's all.
And to be clear, in case I didn't represent what I believe Mr. Grupp's point to be, is he wants to focus on the redistricting around the middle schools, but not necessarily want to focus on elementary school consolidation at this point, because there's other things that might not happen based on the amount of work. So again, he's not here, unfortunately, to represent that, but I want to see where the board is now
I have a
around the
question.
work we're going to do. So I just wanted, Dr. Thorpe, did you have a comment?
Yeah,
Come over this side.
whether we close a school or not, the exercise in redistricting A, B, and C, which is basically what we've already paid for, if I'm not mistaken, is valuable. I don't know that we can make an informed decision about closing a school or not closing one until we see that. I think that's part of the whole decision-making process. as are these numbers and everything else we're collecting. And we've paid for it. It should be, I mean, with the demographics now complete in your own projections, we may disagree on capacities a little bit, but we're gonna fill the schools adequately, so it should work out just right. So I want to see it. I think talking about or not talking about closing an elementary school is premature until we see everything.
Okay.
I just didn't understand the question. Was Jerry suggesting that we drop the conversation about closing schools now and bring it up again after 2018-19 school year? In other words, just
Yeah,
move.
that's, yeah, and again, it's
So then-
unfortunate he's not here, but I want to take the opportunity to take the temperature of the rest of the board. You know, there's a lot of work that we've got to do. So as we go through this process, you know, Jerry raised it first, but my intent would be to stop and say, okay, you know, do we continue going down this road, or have people seen information that has them starting to lean a certain way or not? So I don't want to necessarily answer your question about how Jerry feels or what he thinks, but you know.
Okay, I am absolutely opposed to kicking the can down the road. Okay, if we're not going to close schools, if we want to make the decision to not close schools now, it would go against what we've said about redistricting kids twice to suggest that we would redistrict the district for 2018-19 and then that year talk about closing a school that would cause another redistricting.
Yeah.
I'm not finished. So if we want to talk about whether or not to close schools, that's a separate conversation. To me, the information that I heard today says that our district is going to stay flat at best for the next 5 years. So we know that basically what we've got in existence now in terms of our buildings is functional for the next 5 years. And we just have to decide, do we want to rein it in or not? But the other thing I heard is that we now have 20 classrooms available and Rolling Hills has 19 classrooms. So if we want to talk about not talking about Rolling Hills anymore, I think that's entirely appropriate because we clearly don't have room to close that school. But relative to Wrightstown, I think that we either have to decide we're going to talk about closing it or not. And if we're not going to talk about, and if we decide not to close it, then the commitment is that we've committed to these schools and it's time for us to invest in those schools and make them what they should be and not just kick this down the road and let these communities feel tortured for another, how many years?
Andy? Yeah, I completely agree that delaying a decision on closing elementary schools would be contrary to the promise that Dr. Fraser has made on behalf of the board, which is we are not going to redistrict twice, that we're going to make decisions now. And I don't think in any way Jerry was thinking about kicking the can down the road. I think that's an unfortunate term to use. I don't think anybody on this board intends to put off or delay making a decision on closing elementary schools. My understanding of what Jerry was suggesting was that we consider whether or not we want to continue the consideration of closing elementary schools or decide at this point to take closing of elementary schools off the table entirely. And by that, I don't in any way think he's talking about putting it off for a year or two. Frankly, we all know that Jerry doesn't intend to be here. Unfortunately, he's moving. So I don't want anybody to think in the public or otherwise that we're just talking about delaying a decision on closing elementary schools. I think what his intent is to say, do we really want to continue the discussion? Because I think there's pretty much unanimity around this table, Denise, that none of us intend to put off, even though it's a very difficult decision, none of us intend to put it off. So I don't want anybody to think that there's going to be any foot dragging on this decision. I think Jerry's point is let's really consider whether or not we want to continue.
I think it's a bit of a mistake for us to sit here and speculate on what Jerry's points are while he's not here to. I understand the intent of what you're trying to do in having the conversation, but we do have facilities next week. Maybe he could have that conversation there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll only say that I think we could have an entire 3 or 4 meetings of this committee to decide what we're doing with Richboro Middle School, which for me is well underway. And that I agree, we've paid for the redistricting. I'm not saying we shouldn't set it, but I struggle with the ability of this board to manage I feel like hundreds, I said this to somebody today, like hundreds of questions I've been asked about what's happening with Richboro Middle School. That's a feeling, I didn't count them. So I connect on the feeling of, I think that this board has a lot to decide, and I think we should look at the redistricting, but I hope that we have the time to really make good decisions. And I don't know that, I mean, we had a whole presentation on what repurposing Richboro Middle, and now I don't know where we're going with that, but we've got to look at closing elementaries, and then we got to go back and what are we going to do with Richboro Middle? And when's that conversation going to happen? And then if whatever we decide to do, especially around Richboro Middle, because we're already building 2 new schools, we have to go into the community. I mean, these meetings are open, yes, but I would hope we would go into the Richboro Middle School community and talk about repurposing it. And there's a great deal, to me, of work in that one project alone that I, frankly, haven't heard as much conversation around. So I'm good to look at the redistricting. The sooner we have it, the better we make, but I certainly have some feelings that the amount of work to close 3 schools in this district, should we decide to do that, I'm just saying that because it's on the table, it is not going to be adequately done in a meeting in April, May, and maybe June. It's my opinion. So we better think about the workload, the time frame, besides the fact we have 11,000 students in the district that we have to operate every day and all the normal ongoing, and the administration has all this. They've probably spent all week preparing for tonight because it takes a lot of work. We've hired some consultants to help them, which I appreciate, Andy. I know you've led, but the volume to me of outstanding questions and decisions to be made is frankly overwhelming. And I think we were trying to we have till December, but I don't know. I think if things start, I think it's good to take this pulse every meeting, because if there's a group of people who feel like a decision is, the sooner we can put it off the table and focus on the decisions to be left, the better off the group will be.
And the better off the communities will be, because
Yeah,
they'll
agreed.
at least have some closure, and that's really the intent, is to.
I mean, Richboro Middle School, we've spent the money on the 2 new middle schools. I mean, I don't know. I know we haven't officially, I guess we have to take a vote to close the school. Did we do that or not? I forget. There's been.
We have to wait 3 months
I can't even keep
after
track
the
of what's happening. But there are a lot of questions following that decision. A lot of questions. And I don't even think we've tipped the iceberg of some of the questions.
Yep.
So I've encouraged everybody to write in. I don't really feel like they have. Maybe I'll start writing in when they ask me, but there are a lot of questions.
Mr. Bialik, I feel like you want to.
I do.
Okay.
I've been very vocal about the fact that I think that we should redistrict first before closing schools. So I'm glad that we're off of that track where we were initially talking about deciding which schools we're going to close and then redistrict. However, I'm not a fan of deciding not to close schools or putting off the discussion about closing schools, however you want to say it, without having a clear understanding. We have to know where the kids are sitting before we make any decisions about this. And I don't know, it feels like we're getting there and then we veer off, and it's very, very frustrating. So I'm trying not to be frustrated. But, and it is so unfair to the community to say, prepare for it. We've been working on this. I know, Wendy, we have a few meetings left, but a lot of activities goes on between those meetings with the administration and other board members. I know I've had conversations in the community and with Northampton Township about Richboro Middle just on my own to try to get a handle on. I hope we never talk again about repurposing Richboro Middle School for district use, by the way, because that presentation was staggering as far as cost, and I think would be terribly irresponsible of this school to do it, in my opinion. But we keep telling the community that this is what we're going to do and this decision we're going to make. A lot of the community, I think we've all had meetings with members of the community, certainly in Wrightstown. it would be so unfair to say, well, wait a minute, now we're not doing this now. We're going to do it at another time, or we're going to just decide not to do it. But we know that the schools are terribly inefficient, but we're not going to close any. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to be on track. We've been working on this for 3 years, almost as long as I've been on the board. So I just don't know how we pull back now and say we're not going to do it. And I respect Jerry's opinion, and I respect where he's coming from. But I think it's the wrong way to go. Let's redistrict. Let's know where the kids are coming from. Let's know where they're sitting, and then we can make a decision about what schools to close. That's all.
So for me, just one comment. Cost avoidance is sort of like a weird term for me, because the only way, to Mark's point, is to have cost avoidance is to not use the building. We talk about the cost avoidance of Richboro Middle School, and then we have a meeting about the repurposing of that building that's going to cost, excuse me, $22 million. So the only way to avoid the cost is to no longer use the building, either to sell it or just whatever we call that phrase, just mothball it or whatever it is. So that's a little deceiving as we look at these things. But when we talk about the schedule that we've laid out, there are certain things that have to be firm, right? So the Richboro Middle and Holland Middle and Newtown Middle will be completed on time, and we're going to open in 2018-19. Okay, so that's firm, and we need to put students into those buildings, so that's firm. And we're hopefully going to do so we redistrict once, do this redistricting to create these feeder patterns, and that's firm. The pressure that we feel about Richboro Middle School, and I agree, that is a source of a lot of conversation. We don't have to do that in 2018. We can choose to move that a year later, 2 years later, or whatever we decide. Because for me, the things that are firm, which are the things that touch our students, that's the first priority. What we're going to do with a building that is not going to house, students as we know it, we may move some programs in there, we don't know, it depends on so many of these other decisions. But if we start thinking about what we have to think about more in these buckets of what we need to address first, for me, the repurposing of Richboro Middle School is definitely further later in that timeline, because our first focus has to be on those other things that are firm in those dates. And so if it is overwhelming and we need to back away or elongate the timeline, well, then it's the things that are lesser priorities that happens to. So I would not like to see our conversations about what we're doing with the elementary footprint, what we're doing with redistricting, feel overburdened by these other things that we have the control over to make less burdensome on not only us, but all of the staff and our community. So.
I can't in good faith spend $180 million to use Mark's money and then not have a decision on an empty property when the board will have the information or should focus on having the information and have that savings. I mean, just with even looking at elementary schools, we put up cost avoidance or cost savings, whatever you want. Part of that goes into your decision making. So the savings that we're supposed to get and the avoidance of a lease, I know you don't want to, you've expressed that you don't want to repurpose it, or maybe selling it off, to me, is all part of the obligation when I agreed to spend the money to build new middle schools. So delaying it, letting it sit around for a couple years or a year or whatever, for me, students are always first. Of course, I agree with that. But for me, that was part of my decision making when I agreed to do the middle schools. And so I would not be comfortable pushing that decision off and having it just sit there.
I just want to clarify, I'm not suggesting delaying that for a long period of time, even if we decided to shift it a year to take the pressure off.
Become first,
But
yes.
understand something, if what I heard was that there's difficulty in talking about the conversation about elementary schools because that is weighing into all the decisions. If we can focus on the elementary schools, then we'll know what the footprint is and know if we actually need that for some of those things that are being repurposed. If we're going to close an elementary school, maybe some of those functions that were going to go into Richboro Middle School would now go into a different building. So for me, I wouldn't be able to make a decision about what would be in the best interest of Richboro Middle School until I understood what the rest of the district looked like. And that's all I'm suggesting. And I'm saying that if all the issues that surround Richboro Middle are holding up, decisions, we could just alter the timeline a little bit so that we can focus on the things that set in place a path that will allow us to make better decisions about Richboro Middle. And because the $180 million that's being spent is to put the kids in, and that's what we're doing. The cost savings, if we're gonna have to renovate those schools, it's costing, if we're gonna renovate Richboro Middle, it isn't a cost avoidance, we're talking about spending money sooner. So I'm just saying that, and this came up, Mark brought this up at the last meeting, to talk about how we would repurpose Richboro Middle School before we understand what the rest of the district look like, that doesn't make sense. You need to have an understanding. So if we have 10 elementary schools, or 9 or 8 or whatever it is, then we could move on and say, what would we use Richboro Middle School for, in my opinion.
Dr. Foster, you had a comment, and I'll come to Mr. Biley.
That timeline makes a lot of sense to me, that we know when the middle schools will open. And so we know when we do need to do some redistricting, and what we do with Chancellor, what we do with Richboro Middle in that context, it can be a distraction and can overload the circuit. So I personally agree with that. And then also another thing, and I don't want to upset anyone with this comment, but I feel like it is easy to spend money, right? And so I see us doing all the things that lead to spend, but the things that lead to reduced spending, the closing a building and walking away from it, the consolidating schools to reduce your operating costs, those really difficult decisions that impact a community's identity, but save us money, I think they need to come forward. And the ones that represent more spending need to go back, because I really feel like we've been on this, I don't think it's 3 years, I think we've been on this for 4 years. And we've been doing this a while, and we spent the $110 million for the middle schools. And we had all this talk about how we're going to go into this and save money. It's like I haven't felt that, and I'm beginning to get frustrated because the pension keeps going up. We're not making the efficiency changes we need, and healthcare is still exploding. And I do see other districts giving more investment in technology for the children. I see other districts giving more investment in athletics than we do. I see other districts giving more investment in languages than we do. And so I get frustrated, and I almost feel like we're poised to just put all of our money into capital, into buildings, and fall a little bit behind. And I think we desperately need some money to help strengthen our programming. Just seems like, even though it's going to be painful to get at. So thank you for your comments, Mrs. Brooks.
My turn. I just want to follow up on the LSAC lease because it was mentioned, and I heard some comments after the Richboro Middle School presentation. I absolutely believe that we should get out of that LSAC lease as soon as possible. We pay over $400,000 a year, and my understanding is that the facility is subpar for our students, and we have, all of our kids are very important. This is a special group of individuals that need special attention, special accommodations, and we should be doing everything we can for them. When you tell a civilian that we spend $400,000 a year for this lease, you get a sideways look, and it's absolutely appropriate. When you tell that same person that we're potentially looking to spend $23 million to save $25 million, it's incredulous, and nobody can grasp that. We can buy a property in Newtown Borough, Newtown Township, wherever, Richboro, wherever, for the kids in Achieve and Sloan, I don't know, for $1 million, which is a lot of money, but my gosh, so much less than what we're talking about with Richboro Middle, and then do the renovations that we need to do, the expansions, whatever. If we come out at $2 million, hey, we've got a great property for these kids, centrally located where they can have access to businesses, and We never talk about that kind of thing. Let's talk about logical, simple things that anybody else that's not spending other people's money thinks are reasonable things. So I'd really, LSAC, I think, should be a priority. Again, not speaking for the board, but I kind of put feelers out there. Hey, what kind of properties can we get that aren't $23 million for these kids? That'd be a great find, right? There happens to be a lot of properties in our district that are less than $23 million. So I'm hoping we can find a handful, one or two, and maybe we can take it back to whomever screens these things, and maybe we can take a look at it and coalesce around that idea. Let's move these kids, and it should not derail it. And, I think that lease is
Completely agree.
aberrant, and we should get out of it as soon as possible. So I
I'd
just
love
want
to
to be
have time to
clear.
talk about some of those.
Well, we can. It doesn't have to be at these committee meetings either. We can talk, like you and I can do that, Wendy. We can go out and talk to people, not as representatives of the board, but I can do that. I'm a citizen, right? And I pay taxes. I want to save that money. Not that we shouldn't have these discussions in public, but I can bring my findings back, and then we can make the decisions in public, right? So not everything has to be done at the next 3 meetings. There's a lot of work that can be done.
No, I just don't even
As
think
we
we've
move.
talked about what work needs to be done. Like, does everybody think that's a good idea? And should somebody go off and do it? And are there 5
I think
or
it's a
6
I think it's a
other-
great idea, and I've already started to do it. So
Well, I'm just saying,
when
and maybe there's 8, 9 of us, maybe there's 9 other good ideas that
Right.
should be looked at. That's all I'm saying, is I still feel a lot of unanswered questions that I would like to see answered. I just think there's a lot of them.
Okay, glad I
Brought
brought
that up.
Jerry's point up
There you
without Jerry being here. But no, I think that was good discussion. Again, it's this committee's task and intent to bring, the big decision on the elementary schools and so much of these other things in John through the redistricting to a decision point in the next several months so we can get on to do the next logical steps. So we're gonna keep doing that. In the interest of time and getting a public comment, I am not going to, unless there's a massive appetite, talk about what I wanted to next. But one of the things that we heard, I'll do a 2-minute piece on it and leave it, is Chancellor Center. There's a significant capital expense required with getting this building to where it needs to be. And at the same time, there hasn't been a lot of appetite that I've heard around this board to close or give up this building. So the question becomes, we still have that expense, and there's trade-offs that we have to make if we deal with it ourselves. So the conversation at some point might be worthwhile around how do we engage partners in the community, public or private, to find ways to get this building where it needs to be, and look at alternative uses, whether it be for our administration as it is today or other community folks, as we talked about a little bit the last meeting coming in, but looking if there's ways to offset costs through private or public partnerships. So, without Jerry being here to drive that conversation because it was his idea, I've gotten several phone calls from people who heard him make that, which I think is a good idea. So we'll hold that for another meeting because we have lots of other important things to talk about. So thanks for the conversation tonight.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Do you mind? Just because you brought up Chancellor. So when we saw the enrollment numbers for North at 1,733 students, I've seen that a lot, but for whatever reason, it just really drew my attention tonight. So I looked it up, but I couldn't find it. I think my graduating class in 1986 was 800 students, right? So just the seniors. The school was smaller, and all the administration was there at the Council Rock High School. So I'd kind of like to look at if we really have a conversation about maybe, I think Jerry's point was we can move the Achieve and Sloan kids into here, or some kind of community organization into here. Why can't we move the administration back into the vast spaces we must have at Council Rock North? Because there's a lot less kids there now, and the school's bigger. So we've never really explored that, and I think there's pretty nice offices there, and probably a training center and things like that. So that
Well,
would
we
be
can
nice.
see what we bounce on north and south side of the district, see what's there, make decisions on the elementary
Great.
schools, see what's what. There's a lot of work to get to that, but I think that's a good point. So before we get to public comment, I don't want to forget Dr. Frazier, like I did at the last meeting, to talk about our upcoming meetings and the topics of those meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Block. We do have 2 remaining scheduled meetings out of this 5-meeting process. The next will be on Monday, April 24th. And the priority topics of that meeting will be taking a look, as per this last discussion, at redistricting models. That will not be specific. It will not be neighborhood by neighborhood, much less street by street, but it will be a very high-level look at what, looking at status quo, looking at Rolling Hills closure, looking at Wrightstown closure. Again, a very, very high-level look at what a redistricting scenario times 3 there might look like for each of those 3 models. And then the second priority topic on April 24th will be the appraisal results. We will be having appraisals coming in on a number of our district facilities, as well as the house tract, that site up in Wrightstown Township. So all that will be coming on April 24th. And then our 5th and final meeting will be on Monday, May 22nd. So again, April 24th and May 22nd will be our remaining meetings. And we hope everyone is either able to join us in person or to tune in on television. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. All right, we'll move to public comment. Just remember, we're on TV. Keep it to 3 minutes, please. I'll give you the high sign when you get there. That being said, step to the mic, give your name and town. It's got to be somebody. Come on.
Steve and Nancy are going to do it now.
Nancy Carroll, Newtown Borough. I was on the Chancellor Reuse Committee, and it was proposed to be $3 million, whether it was a school or an office building. They said there's not much difference. It wouldn't cost much different, and as a matter of fact, it was $3 million to build new down where the senior center is. So it was just a choice of what would be most central to the district, you know, and also the ambience of this building. So it wasn't a matter of cost. It was $3 million no matter what. So last time when we said Richboro Middle would be more money to be a school than an office, I was shocked because we were told back in 2000, didn't matter. Once you have to drop the things, you got to have the bathrooms, you got to have the handicap accessible, it costs the same amount of money. Now, I had a little tussle, and I apologize to Charlie Lambert by email and asked him to forward to you about the number of kids who were in the Sloan and the Achieve program. And it's like 70 or 80 kids total, both. And you want to put 70 or 80 kids in this building, has 13 classrooms. You're always wanting to put kids in spaces that are bigger than the amount of kids. An example is Goodnow. Did you see, for years I stood up and said Goodnow was too big, and that slide said Goodnow is too big for the amount of kids that are in there. And then you want to build onto Wrightstown. Who's going to go there? All the other schools, none of the schools up in the north are tight. They all have more space. I hear 20 classrooms, I times that by 27, and I say, if tomorrow, whatever that number is, 540 kids showed up on our door, we have a place for them tomorrow. Now, they're not going to be so many in kindergarten and so many in first grade, and they're not going to line up to Wendy's point. But we also have all those other sections that are inefficient, that are at 75%. You need to start saving money on operating. At the last Finance Committee meeting, we learned that the state considers us the 4th most richest district in the state, with Chadds Ford, Lower Merion, and Tredyffrin Eastern being above us. So I looked at what they're doing in technology, and they're all doing 10 times more than we are. And at the academic standards meeting, I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, that would be nice, but we don't have the money. Oh, it'd be nice to have another math section, but we don't have the money. It'd be nice to have one-on-one, we don't have the money. The reason you do not have the money is because you're spending it on the wrong things. Get those savings, put them into the kids and into the academics and race there as fast as you can get there. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Dr. Kimberly Hirschkel. I live in Newtown Township. This is a perfect lead-in because I wanted to talk to you about some concerns I have about when we talk about utilizing the capacity of the schools. And I want you to look at the research for the Center for Public Education that talks about the student to teacher ratio, not the student to staff ratio, which tends to be a lot lower when we look at supplementary staff in schools. They say that basically they recommend we see the most benefit when we have a 20-to-1 ratio. And the longer that ratio is in place and the lower that ratio is, the higher the impact on the achievement for students. And so when we're talking about putting classrooms at 27 students, I don't know how many of you have ever been in a classroom, but 2 more students makes a big difference. Teaching 24 kindergartners versus 30 kindergartners, or even 20 versus 22 kindergartners. That's an enormous drain on resources. And so I really want us to think carefully about the quality of education for the students and maintaining the high standards that we in Council Rock expect for our students. Second, I think it's important to maintain the community, the involvement of the community. I know we've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about the spirit of our school district, and I think that's really important. Some of the minutia of moving 50 students in previous proposals from one school to the other, I think it's valid to talk about whether or not redistricting is going to involve moving 2 students from one neighborhood to one other bus stop. I think so, those are some of the details that we in a community are worried about at that ground level. And finally, Mr. Sundell, I really appreciated his presentation, but if you're really looking to tap into community support, please don't talk about survival rates from year to year of students. It's kind of creepy. Maybe retention or like maintaining or something, but as a parent and as a professional and as a teacher, when I hear survival rates from kindergarten to 1st grade, I don't think like coming back. I think survival. So I think that's just kind of to the board, maybe a response. Thanks.
That's a great point. Thank you. It really is.
Hi, Gina Yarnell from Rolling Hills. I'd like to give you my top 10 reasons why I don't think you should close Rolling Hills. First, number 10 is with the number of townhomes in our school, young families are always moving in, so the potential for increased student population will never cease. Number 9, while the population in the district is declining, enrollment at Rolling Hills is increasing. We are up to 437 students from 401 students in the year 2012-2013. And also, in the presentation today, he did not include, Mr. from Sundance, did not include any new construction in the Northampton end of the district. And I know that there is some new construction, so that should have been included. Because what I've been told is that there are some undeveloped parcels of land in Northampton that have the potential to be developed on and could house possibly a few hundred students. And I did have that from a pretty viable source. Number 7, if you vote to sell the Richboro Middle School property, our community will be losing valuable field space for sporting events, and Rolling Hills also houses sporting events such as soccer and baseball, and closing the school will impact the field shortage even more. That's something I don't know if I've heard anybody talk about. Number 6 is that Rolling Hills has 196 walkers, the highest by far in the district. 43% of our student population are walkers. So closing Rolling Hills would cost the district money to have to bus these students, and that has not been figured anywhere as well. Number 5 is the available sections throughout the district are mainly in the north part of the district. There are not enough sections in the south to house 437 students. Number 4, with what is now only 20 sections available, if Rolling Hills should close, taking 19 of those sections, that leaves no available space for entertaining, adding full-day kindergarten, or any wiggle room for population increases to add sections. Number 3, the savings of closing a school with over 400 students is not that significant over closing a school with half the number of students. And remember, you must add back into the equation, busing 196 students. So that savings is not what you're reflecting in your numbers. Number two, the number of sections at Rolling Hills has a track record of remaining steady. We are only down 1 or 2 sections from 2003 when we were 21 sections. And the last reason I think is you're talking about capital cost avoidance. I think the district has been avoiding Rolling Hills for a very long time. It's time the district rights the mistake it made years ago by choosing not to renovate a thriving school. Rolling Hills needs to remain open and a renovation needs to be addressed sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Been a long time, Mr. McGill.
Sometimes I think not long enough. Steve McGill, Holland, PA. I couldn't not come tonight to hear the demographics again. But I just have a couple things to say that I think the board needs to reconsider, no matter what your priority is in terms of making decisions. And that is, there are several problems that the board has kind of, I don't want to say painted themselves into a corner, but they've made it harder than it should be. One is that the board locked themselves into this class configuration thing, that they won't move 6th grade into a middle school or that type of thing, okay? It's happening in districts around us, and they've had very good success with it. And, I think that, the board really needs to reconsider that issue, especially in light of the fact that, at some point, somebody won the battle to have the 2 new middle schools the same size, even though we've had a population imbalance in the district for a long, long time. And I think that that's a second issue that, has put us in a box. Third thing is this whole perception that redistricting is a boogeyman, that, you should only do this thing once every 30 years. That's one of the reasons why we're in this box in the first place. It's been put off and put off and put off and put off, and it is to the detriment of our kids. Because when they leave school, the first thing they're going to find out in life is that change is not only inevitable, it's coming at them like a freight train every day, and it's going to get worse. And we need to be teaching them how to deal with change in a positive way, rather than saying, oh, I can't change anything. Okay, it's nice to think that, but I can tell you again, I've said it before, I worked for 40 years with a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds. The people who had the best ability to adapt and succeed were military kids who moved every 2 years. They came through with flying colors every time. I cannot think of one failure, one person that I was able to take into their career and not have success with them when 6 months into something I said, okay, Charlie, you're not going left, you're going right. And they picked it up and they said, okay, we're off to the races. And that is a disservice to our community to not allow our kids to learn how to deal with change. I think that Wendy has a great idea, and that is at the beginning of November or whenever, you should sit down and say, okay, you 30 kids go here, you 30 kids go here, you 30 kids go here. You don't have to implement it, but do it as an exercise so that you get used to this thing. Thank you.
Any more public comment? And our next meeting, April 24th, 7 o'clock here. Committee adjourned. Everybody have a terrific weekend.
Trash.
Yeah.
What's going on?